This vintage Pyrex dish sold for over $22,000 on eBay. I mean, who wouldn't want to find one of these at a thrift store, garage sale, or estate sale? Hey there, welcome back to my channel, Texas Gal Treasures. My name is Margaret, and today I'm sharing 10 vintage categories that sell really well on eBay right now. And I'll be sharing the eBay proof on each one. This is a first in a series I'm creating of vintage items that sell really well on eBay right now. I have created a PDF for you to fill in as we go. Today, I'm sharing the 10 categories and some of the items that you will find in those categories that are performing and selling really well on eBay. The follow-up videos will be taking each of those categories and diving way deeper so that you're going to have a really robust list by the end of lots of different things to look for when you're out at thrift stores, garage sales, and estate sales that you can sell on eBay. Some of these items are a needle in a haystack, like the $22,000 Pyrex dish we're going to talk about, but others will be things that you will be able to find if you know what to look for. And if you are ready to turn thrift store finds into cash, super cheesy sounding, then make sure you are subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the videos in this series. Let's start with a category that is absolutely exploding right now, and that is vintage Pyrex. First up on our list are the pink gooseberry Cinderella bowls. What do you need to look for when you're looking at Pyrex gooseberry bowls? Pink gooseberry is exactly what it sounds like. Pink bowls with white designs, or white bowls with pink designs of gooseberry plants on them. Here you can see on eBay 129 results for solds for pink gooseberry Cinderella bowl set. This is sorted by ended recently, and you can see that they are consistently selling for well over $150. And it looks like the more of these bowls of the set that you have, the more you can ask. The highest price sold on this set was almost $500 with free delivery coming from a set of 4 bowls. So if you see these pink gooseberry bowls at estate sales, garage sales, or thrift stores, make sure you snap them up to sell them on eBay because they could bring anywhere from $150 to $400 in profit. And while the pink gooseberry is a great find, the holy grail of Pyrex dishes to find is this Lucky in Love casserole dish. This one sold for $22,000 on auction. It is super rare. It was a promotional Pyrex dish that was put out, so it's super hard to find. And while this one might be a needle in the haystack, I want you to know it so that if you do see it, that it will be right there front and center for you in your mind to know, I need to grab that ASAP. What's going to stand out on this Lucky in Love casserole dish is there are hearts and there are 4-leaf clovers. When I look at eBay, there are absolutely none of the casserole dishes up for sale. What you will find are these clear ones, and they still sell. They're clearly not selling for what the original opaque Pyrex dishes are selling for, but these can still sell. So if you see the hearts, you see the 4-leaf clovers, then grab them. This is just an art print that somebody made of the pattern for a necklace. I also did a Google search to see if there were any up on other platforms, and there were not. There are altered Pyrex dishes that are up, but they are not selling for the same amount. I started to get excited when I saw this Etsy listing, even though it was $34. I was like, did I find more? No, these are miniatures for a dollhouse. All right, we've got 2 Pyrex filled in on the chart. Leave a comment down below and see if you can predict what other Pyrex patterns are going to end up on this list in the next video. Now, while you are cleaning out those closets and attics and finding boxes of dusty old shirts, before you toss them out or send them to the Goodwill, check to make sure you don't have any vintage concert shirts, especially from the 80s and 90s. One of the band's concert shirts that you need to be looking for that is consistently selling for a high price are Nirvana concert t-shirts. You want to look for ones that have the single stitch hem, but let's take a look at what some of the different designs look like. This was the In Utero tour. This one sold for $1,650. This was from the European tour, so I think that's why it went a little bit higher. Even the US in utero tour shirt can sell for well over $500. This was my late high school years, so I'm kicking myself because I know a lot of people had this shirt. One thing you want to watch out for, though, is that there are a lot of companies that have reprinted some of these shirts. So you might see this Nirvana shirt with the smiley flower. There are lots of reprints of it, but what you want to look for is wild oats. The tag will say wild oats on it, and the back will not be blank. Another one of Nirvana's shirts that is selling pretty consistently is the heart-shaped box tour. This is another one that there are reprints of, as you can see here, but the original has this background with the red and the black hearts on it. But that being said, this one even shares that it is a reprint from Japan, and it's still sold for $174. Next up is Oasis. Oasis is reuniting for a tour, and even Alice Cooper is weighing in, encouraging them to avoid fighting on their reunion tour. So you know what that means. Their merch, old and new, is going to start skyrocketing. A lot of Oasis shirts are really easy to spot because they have their band name front and center on their shirts. Here are Oasis, some might say 1995 tour shirts, selling for upwards of $650 and more. The Oasis All Around the World tour shirt, $550. Here's one that sold for $280 on auction. Over and over, we're seeing these Oasis shirts that are selling for well over $100. Okay, it's prediction time. Get your list ready. What other concert shirts do you think will end up on the list? And then we'll see if they match up in the vintage concert shirt video. Did you know that eBay users searched the term vintage over 1,000 times a minute last year? So next up on our list, one of my favorite things to sell, vintage purses and handbags. And first up on the list is an oldie but a goodie, and that is Enid Collins. I'm starting with Enid Collins wooden bags because those are super easy to spot if you see a wooden box bag. And depending on the style of Enid Collins bag that you've got, they're painted, they've got design gems glued on them. Starting off with these Enid Collins wood bags, because they're going to be really easy to spot, you could be looking at anything upwards of $550 depending on the design that you find. Here are a few more that are in the $200 range, and you'll see that Enid Collins loves birds, owls, so a lot of those designs will have that on it as well. This owl Enid Collins bag sold for $150. I took out box bag from my search term just so you could see what the other bags look like. When they're not the boxes, they're this heavy canvas bags, so they feel really sturdy. This Enid Collins horse tote bag sold for $349. Here are some more of the box bags that sold for over $300. And here are a few more just so you get the idea of what to look for. So when you see this, they're painted on and they've got these very showy embellishments. Once you know how to spot Enid Collins bags, they will stand out whenever you see them. And a tip for Enid Collins is they will be signed. There will be an EC, and sometimes you'll find her name signed on the inside, Enid Collins. The next vintage purse that is selling really well on eBay right now are vintage Whiting & Davis mesh handbags. And I recently found one at the thrift store when I was making a video about AI helping me search, and the one I found still has the tag, so I'm very excited. I have my pictures taken, but I don't have it listed yet, so I need to get on that. As you can see, 428 sales for Whiting Davis mesh bags. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's that metal mesh, and they usually have a hinged closing top. And depending on the style, the age, the quality, the condition, all of these are going to play into how much you can make on your vintage Whiting Davis mesh bag when you sell it on eBay. And they really aren't that hard to find. Just like Enid Collins, I found one at a garage sale just a couple months ago, and this I just found a couple weeks ago. So they are definitely out there. This beautiful Whiting Davis butterfly mesh handbag sold for $222. And this gorgeous gold mesh one sold for $195. It definitely seems like the more colorful, the more intricate the design of the mesh, the higher price you can get for it. But scrolling through these solds, just one after another, well over $100. All right, if you're playing, let's play along. What other vintage handbag and purse brands do you think are going to end up on the list? Next up is a category that is near and dear to my heart, and that is vintage jewelry. First up is Bakelite. I have done a lot of different videos on how to identify Bakelite, so I'll make sure to link those here if you're interested, because a lot of people walk past them. I find them still at thrift stores and garage sales and estate sales because people think they're just plastic jewelry. Bakelite is an early plastic, and it was made with formaldehyde, so it has a very distinctive smell. There are other ways to test for it, but once you learn how to spot it, you can find it in the wild easily. I have found it at thrift stores. I found it in Goodwill grab bags. Here you see this red Bakelite bangle that sold for $185. Here's a butterscotch yellow that sold for $65. I have these sorted by ended recently. Let's go in for the highest price. This rare Philadelphia Bakelite clamper bracelet sold for $3,600. It's gorgeous. Here are a couple of black and cream Bakelite bangles that sold for well over $1,000. And here are some Bakelite brooches, just so you get an idea of what to start looking for when you're out and about. It seems like the Bakelite brooches that have dangles or charms coming off of them seem to be selling for a much higher price, but even standalone Bakelite brooches like this little frog that sold for $500, but best offer was taken. The next item under the vintage jewelry category is sterling silver Native American jewelry, and this is one that is a consistent seller over time. I have these sorted by ended recently, and you can see that there are over 12,000 results for sold and completed listings in the last 90 days. That's a lot of jewelry. And these 12,000 sold, you can see, are just sterling silver Native American rings. What are you going to look for? Well, sterling silver, a lot of times you can spot it because it starts to tarnish. You want to make sure that it's stamped inside, especially if you're out and you don't have any way to test it. You want to make sure that you see a stamp inside. You see maybe some tarnish that lets you know that it's silver, or at least silver plate. But most of the time with sterling silver Native American jewelry, you'll see a stamp inside. You want to find ones that have a maker's mark or a maker's stamp inside because those are going to be more desirable. Let's take a look at highest first. When I'm looking at these high ticket price sales, I see a lot of squash blossom necklaces, which is this little necklace that's got lots of turquoise and things coming off of it, and then the squash blossom design at the bottom. And if you're going to list this as Native American and use that terminology, you've got to make sure that you can prove the maker and or the tribe that they came from. Otherwise, you can't list it as Native American. You have to list it as Southwest. I really like finding Zuni jewelry because it's super easy to spot, especially if you're new. This style is called petite point, and a lot of the Zuni Native American jewelry will look like a mosaic. When I scroll down here, you can see this Zuni Raggedy Ann jewelry. You can really tell it looks like a mosaic of different stones that have been pieced together to create an image. And this set sold for $895. What else do you think is going to end up on the vintage jewelry to look for list? Next up on the list is a fun one. It is vintage holiday items. And I get the question a lot. When should I start listing my holiday items to make sure they sell for Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, etc.? And my advice is always to list it as soon as you have it, because there are people buying year-round. People that collect holiday items, whether it's Christmas, Halloween, what have you, they're buying all year round. So I have Christmas and Halloween things selling all year round. The first item going onto the list is vintage Christmas blow molds. This vintage Empire Santa train and tender car blow mold sold for $1,199. Here are blow mold reindeers that sold for $700. These Three Stooges blow molds sold for almost $700. I see one here that snuck in that wasn't Christmas, and it's this haunted house Halloween blow mold. There's a couple that sold, and I love it when I see the same item that is sold multiple times, like this Christmas schoolhouse blow mold. I keep trying to say snow globe, sold for $500, $520 on this one. And I know, especially speaking for myself, I get intimidated shipping really large items, but for this price, and as you can see, they charge $200 for shipping on this. And on the haunted house, they charge $63 for shipping. So with that price and the buyer is paying for it to be shipped, I think I would be able to figure it out and get that thing shipped. Even if I had to take it down to UPS or one of these places that will help me pack and ship it, for that price, I think I would invest in that. The next item on the list is very niche. It is vintage paper mache jack-o'-lanterns, but we're going to look at some other paper mache Halloween items as well. 241 results just for paper mache jack-o'-lantern, and I'm filming this in July. So these have sold in May, June, and July, nowhere near October. The prices that people got for some of these is insane. So $1,500 on this one. This unusual vintage USA paper mache Halloween jack-o'-lantern, $625. And some of these just look so bizarre, but I think that's their charm. They don't look so mass-produced. And I think that is something that is a trend we're going to see a lot more of, especially with all of the fast fashion and things that are produced so quickly and cheaply, that people are really starting to want to get things that are more unique and one of a kind. I think we're going to see a lot more of vintage items making a comeback. I took out jack-o'-lantern, replaced it with Halloween. We've got 603 results for Halloween paper mache items in the month of July. And some of these super unique pieces are selling for over $1,000. 4 more categories to go. And if you're not playing along, filling out the chart, leave a comment down below. Make your predictions. What other vintage holiday items do you think are going to make the list in the holiday item video? Next up is a category that is near and dear to my heart. I absolutely love Star Wars. I'm a huge fan, and vintage Star Wars figures are selling like hotcakes. Star Wars has always been a really good seller, but with the release of some of the new series that have come out, like The Mandalorian, Andor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, there's a big renewed interest in Star Wars memorabilia. I've sorted my search by vintage Star Wars figure minus lot because I didn't want to see a big lot of a bunch of characters. I wanted to see what to really hone in on. There are 18,000 results. And I have these sorted by the highest first, just so you can start seeing what to look for that will bring the most money. A lot of the ones that I'm seeing that sold for the highest amount are ones that are still in the package. It might be a challenge to find them still new in package, but it's not unheard of. This is a sealed Boba Fett from 1979. Another reason that this one sold for so much is because it says unpunched. And what that means is that the hole at the top that gets punched when they put it on the shelf, when they hang it on those rods at the store, is unpunched. So there's no hole at the top, and that makes it even more desirable. Boba Fett is one of my favorite characters, so I love that I see his figure selling for so much. And here you can see a little better on this card where that piece is unpunched. I'm going to scroll down so I can start showing you some of the loose figures that you might find just in somebody's toy bin at a garage sale, or you might find it in a grab bag at a thrift store. There's a character called Yak Face, and he is one that I keep seeing selling over and over again loose. So he is one that you should definitely look for, Yak Face. And he looks like his face is just kind of squished. He's got a long head. He sold for $630 here, $650 here. And if I scroll down, here's another one, $611. And they're all over the place. So this one's in the UK, the US, and this one sold from Australia. Another one that I've seen repeat is this IG-88 figure, and he sold for over $600. And this one is another one I've seen loose selling over and over again. Next up on our list is the Transformers G1 figures. Transformers are the figures that change from cars or other items into robots. The G1 stands for Generation 1. So the first early ones are the ones that are selling for a lot of money. Over 5,000 results for Transformers G1 figures. And I started with the highest first just to show you, even though it might be harder to find some of these still in the box, I want you to know what to look for. Just in case you see this needle in the haystack, you will know to pick it up. Here is a Megatron and an Optimus Prime. Both of these sold for $1,000. And this is one that I've talked about before, this Fortress Maximus. This one sold for $897. When I scroll down past some of these that are still in the box, we're seeing Scorponok for $395. I remember Bumblebee being one of my favorites growing up, $419 on this Bumblebee figure. I didn't get to have Star Wars or Transformer toys growing up, but my brothers did, and I definitely played with theirs. We have a few more categories to go, but I want to know, what is your favorite childhood toy? The next category we're looking at is vintage clothing. I don't sell a ton of vintage clothing, but when I find really cool items like this, I absolutely pick them up. I think we're going to see even more of a resurgence in vintage clothing because I think a lot of people are getting worn down by this fast fashion of pieces of clothing that are being mass produced and they're cheaply made. So first up on the vintage clothing list are 50s circle skirts. And it's just what it sounds like. It's a circle. Looks kind of like a Christmas tree skirt, but it's a skirt that ladies would wear. So here we've got a Lady in the Tramp circle skirt that sold for $550. And here's a hand-painted circle skirt that sold for $550. There are a few others that snuck in here that aren't circle skirts, but here you see this Lone Star patchwork quilt circle skirt that sold for $295, and this French poodle, $282. Here is a dress with a circle skirt that sold for $208. And ooh, I love this green one. This hand-painted green and black circle skirt sold for $170 with best offer taken. To help you date some of these skirts, because there are companies that make vintage style circle skirts like ModCloth, which still can sell really well. But when you're truly wanting to sell a vintage circle skirt, you want to find ones that have these really cool buttons or ones that have a metal zipper. Next up on the vintage clothing list is vintage 501 Levi jeans. You can still find current day 501 jeans, but the vintage ones are truly ones that are going to sell for a lot of money. This is a pair of 1940s vintage 501 jeans. You'll see it says Big E. Let me show you what that means. When you see listings mention Big E, it's talking about the E in the label where Levi's is written out, and the E is an uppercase E rather than a lowercase e. These are extremely long. These came off of a display. These sold for over $7,000. And when I'm searching through these over and over again, I'm seeing the 40s, 50s, 60s that are selling for thousands of dollars for a pair of blue jeans. It is definitely worth taking the time to figure out which Levi's 501 jeans are selling for a big profit. So keep your eye out for that big E on a red tag for some serious blue jean profit. The next category we're going to dive into on vintage items that are selling really well on eBay are vintage books and magazines. I have been selling vintage magazines, comic books for years, and there are definitely some that you should keep your eyes open for, bring in a huge profit. This is one I hesitated adding to the list because I know we all see Nancy Drew books all over the place, but it only takes a moment to flip through them and see if it's one of these that could be worth hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. What you want to look for are first editions. For example, this Nancy Drew #2 first edition sold for $496. And this Secret of the Old Clock Nancy Drew #1 sold for $200. And this lot of 8 Nancy Drew first editions sold for $105. Next up in this category are vintage magazines, and there are some that are worth so much money. If you find really unique or unusual magazines or comic books, pick them up. This magazine is called Amazing Stories. This one magazine sold for $1,200. It's the first appearance of Buck Rogers. Here is another Amazing Stories magazine that sold for $140. I absolutely love selling vintage magazines. They're easy to store, easy to ship, easy to photograph. I will say that you have to be very specific in the condition issues because collectors want to know, how does it smell? How are the pages? Are they brittle? But for this amount of money, it's so worth it. I have a bunch of other fun vintage books and magazines that are going to be added to the list. If you've been watching me and knowing which ones I sell, you might be able to fill in part of this list before you see the video. But there are some other really fun ones going on this list that sell for a lot of money. The next category is vintage electronics. And first up in the vintage electronics category are Sony Walkmans. I know when the last season of Stranger Things came out and one of the characters was constantly listening to her Walkman, we saw a huge resurgence in people wanting Walkmans. I know my kids did. This is one you should definitely be looking for. This Sony TPS L2 Walkman sold for over $1,900, and it's one that is selling over and over again. So that model is definitely one to look out for. It's really easy to spot because it's blue. Bonus if it has the original headphones with it, with the orange foam on them. But you can see lots of other Sony Walkmans are also selling. So I think it's a fair bet that if you find a Sony Walkman cassette player, take a look at it, look up the model number and see if it's one of these that is selling for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And I just wanted to show you that in the last 90 days, almost 8,000 Sony Walkmans have sold. So it's not something that's just 30, 40, or a couple hundred. It is thousands upon thousands of Sony Walkmans that have sold. Next up on the list are vintage calculators. I know that I'm always looking for one of the Texas Instruments TI calculators. That's one that I always remember to look up. But there are so many others that are selling for a huge profit that I need to slow down whenever I find a vintage calculator. I feel like they're all vintage nowadays. Do people still use calculators? But I need to slow down and really look, because when I was doing this research, I realized, oh my gosh, I think I'm walking past lots and lots of money because I'm not looking at every vintage calculator that I see. And when I search vintage calculators completed and sold listings, it's almost 7,000 sold in the last 90 days. Here's an HP 41CL calculator that sold for $1,500. I'm scrolling past some of these mechanical calculators. I probably would look at it if I saw it because I'm like, what is this thing? I wouldn't know what it was. So if you see something weird looking and you're like, I don't know what this thing is, then take a look at it because it might be worth money. But if we're looking at something that looks like that's a calculator, it looks like an old calculator, let's see what else we should be looking at. Here's another HP 35 that sold for over $1,000. I keep seeing this, so I think this Curta Type 2 vintage Cantina LTD. Oh my gosh, I need to keep an eye out for this because I'm seeing it over and over and over again for over $1,000. Here we go. Another vintage HP 71B calculator. It just looks like a little horizontal calculator. Here's one here, another here, another here. $950, $875 for this calculator. Multi-mod. Here's a vintage Sanyo calculator and they have Ghostbusters on it. This one sold for $749. Here's an HP 41CX calculator with 15 modules, sold for $614. And I think you get the idea. So if you see a vintage calculator, it's worth taking the moment just to plug in those numbers and see if it's one of these that is a hot seller for a lot of profit. Make your predictions. What else do you think is going to end up on the list for vintage electronics that are selling for big money on eBay? Next on the list is vintage home decor items. Again, I really believe that there's a resurgence in a lot of vintage items because there's so much out there. The market is so saturated and flooded with everything that looks exactly the same. So first up on the list are vintage paint by number pictures. You can find these at thrift stores, at garage sales, estate sales. This was in another video I did recently, and one of the questions I got was, how can I tell if it is a vintage paint by number picture or just some other style of painting? When you look at a vintage paint by number picture, you'll be able to see that it looks really blocky. It's very mid-century modern looking the way that it is painted. It's almost got a flatness to it depending on the picture. Some of them are way more elaborate. But this rare vintage 1950s Art Deco paint by number. It sold for $225. And you'll see here that flamingos are a big one, flamingos and birds and animals in different scenes. And this is a very intricate paint by number, Fair Wind Rough Sea, sold for $300, best offer taken. Here's this beautiful Eiffel Tower. I love the color scheme on this one, $225. As I'm looking through these paint by numbers, a lot that are selling for a high price are birds, animals, and really nice scenes. When you find paint by numbers at thrift stores, garage sales, estate sales, and you're wanting to pick it up to sell it on eBay, something to look for is to make sure that it doesn't have a lot of water damage. And then if it's loose without a frame, you want to check those corners to make sure that they're not torn up. Next on the home decor is mid-century modern, pottery, and ceramics, but I'm going to hone in on one thing that I want you to look for because it's something I know a lot of people walk past. So 2,200 results for mid-century modern, pottery, and ceramics. And this is the brand that I want you to hone in on. The reason is that I know that people are going to walk past it because it looks so plain. It is a planter, it is black, and it is completely plain. But this is a vintage Gainey pottery matte black ceramic planter that sold for $350. I have seen people at garage sales just put all their planters out and stick free on them. And my thrift store has a whole section with just planters and vases. And it wouldn't take any time at all to walk over, flip them upside down, and take a look and see if it's marked Gainey. Let me show you what exactly to look for. When I search Gainey planters, this is what comes up. And they look pretty simple. This is just a cream-colored planter that sold for $300 with best offer taken. This is a white one, $250. This one's brown, $225. So you know there are people walking past not knowing what these are. So here's this black one that sold for $350. And when you flip it upside down, it says Gainey Ceramics on the bottom. So take a moment and flip some of these planters over because if you see Gainey, you have hit the jackpot. I want to share some tips for finding great items, whether you're thrifting or at garage sales or at estate sales. There are a couple schools of thought about estate sales. I like to get there early on the first day to get a good look through to see if I find anything that they missed that might be underpriced that I can make a profit on. And then going back at the end when everything is marked down because sometimes you can get great things at a great price. If you're going to a thrift store, find out when they're restocking shelves. My thrift store tends to restock throughout the day, but there are people that come in the morning when they first open, and they're getting cart after cart after cart out in the morning. So I know a lot of the resellers that come to my thrift store are there first thing when they open because all those new carts are rolling out. And at garage sales, don't be shy. If people ask you if there's anything you're looking for, let them know. When I was at a garage sale and I was picking up a couple of Snoopy things, they asked me if Snoopy was something I was interested in, and I said yes. She had 2 boxes of Washterbach and Hallmark Snoopy items still boxed up in her garage that she pulled down and sold to me. This is a great start for 10 vintage categories that are selling well for a big profit on eBay. And if you're wanting to dive deeper, make sure that you've subscribed, hit the notification bell so that you don't miss the 10 videos that are coming to fill in the blanks and give you a lot more to look for in each of these categories. Thanks for hanging out and happy hunting out there. Bye.